It is so nice to be here together in person. I am so thankful that you came to join us today. There are lots of people that would like to be here with us that for a variety of reasons are unable to join us. And there is a tremendous amount to celebrate. So they are here with us, some of them virtually, and some of them in spirit, and some of them maybe we'll watch the video later. Welcome everybody who is out there in the virtual land. I'm here at the Stanford Faculty Club. My name is Chris Spetzler. I'm the Executive Director of the Decision Education Foundation. It's my great pleasure to have you all here and to welcome you. We have a fantastic program that is set out, and one of the things that we want to showcase is not just the Decision Education Foundation, but also all of the individuals that are doing great work in this area. So you will be seeing students and teachers and also leaders in other organizations that will be presenting. For example, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ralph Keaney. So anybody who is involved with the professional decision analysis area would know that Dr. Keaney, Ralph, is one of the preeminent individuals, and it's great to have both the East and the West come together at Stanford in this big tent. And people would know the book Values-Focused Thinking, which is more towards the academic, but also smart choices, which was very early on trying to do this general decision education. And most recently, then a book, Nudge. And Dr. Keaney, Ralph, welcome for coming and telling us a little bit about what it is that you're doing most recently. I'm going to put this up here.
I'd like to talk about some practical ideas to help us all make better decisions. I begin with a few aspects of the facts of what will we use and what won't we use, a couple perspectives, and then talk about 5 elements that I think are pretty crucial that all of us can use and the people we know can use and make better choices. What is a nudge anyway? I define a nudge as a modification of a presentation of a decision to influence the choice of the decision maker. Now, people have done this for years and years in the advertising area. Of course, ads are trying to influence you and nudge you to make a decision in their interest, the people who are selling the products. After that, then it's just not showing up there. Governments and businesses help nudge people a lot of times on the decisions that are important to the people. This is what Thaler and Sunstein wrote about, and the nudges are based on behavioral science insights of how people do make decisions. The thing they often do is choose the easiest decision or the do-nothing decision without a lot of thinking about what the implications of that are. And they defined the word nudge. It wasn't for a decision before that. Decision analysis creates a phenomenal number of insights about the pros and cons of various alternatives. But it doesn't make any decisions, as we all know. So it gives great nudges in many ways to help the people make a better decision in their own interest. That's prescriptive. But what wasn't around is the prescriptive stuff for individuals to make decisions when they don't have analysts to help them or anyone else. What can they do? So what are some facts and why this matters? The only purposeful way you can influence anything in your life is through your decisions. You can have a better life if you make better decisions. And there's been research by Johannes Siebert on that to show that, and just some studies too. And so decision making should be recognized is really a primary skill. Second fact, as a skill, which is the ability to perform something of a high quality. And the answer of how do you do that is you need to do two things. Learn what it is, and then practice using it. For instance, if you don't practice the elements, you won't be very good. Imagine if you took tennis and you learned what you should do, how to serve, how to hit backhands, how to hit forehands, and all you ever did was play games of tennis. You wouldn't be very good at all compared to what would happen if you would practice those elements. The first serve, the second serve, the backhand, the forehand, the lob. One at a time, in many cases, you'd be much, much better. I think it's the same for decision making. And we'll see what those elements are corresponding to that. Fact 4, decision analysis isn't widely used. And the reasons, I feel it's way too tough for most people to do. There's way too much learning, and it's certainly quantitative. And to indicate how tough this is, at a talk with the Society of Decision Professionals, I asked, and with the help of some people in the room, how many personal decisions have you done a complete decision analysis of, and how many professional decisions? And there's the answers by the people in the society, a subset of the people who, without question, better know how to do analysis than about anyone. And many, many people there have less than 10 personal decisions with a complete analysis. I'm one of those. On the other hand, every decision I make that's worthy of thought is done consistent, I think, with the principles of decision analysis. Having some idea of what those are, how to use them, including all the quantitative aspects, you can decide what's crucial. Once in a while, it might be something sophisticated, like the probabilities or a probability distribution of things happen. Sometimes it may be the key thing is just the trade-off between 2 or 3 of the objectives that you're concerned about. And so you think about them. That's all you need to lend the clarity to make a much, much better choice. And so that's why you get fewer even on the personal decisions and the professional decisions. Those are done by people in companies that do a lot of analysis and by consultants like those in the room, and some I've done in the past too. And you can't do too many of those. They take a long time. So in teaching decision making, our objective should be to improve individual decisions. First of all, I think there are no group decisions. Group maybe signs off, but the mind is what thinks, and decisions are made by the mind. So you want to improve the individual decisions, not just to teach people how they can improve their decisions. You got to show them how and get them to practice so they can do that. This would lead you to, 1, let them know what ideas are really crucial, and then how to do them and how to practice them. And then a key aspect is to having people use it on their own decisions, because what does that do? If they use it on their own decisions, not the toughest maybe, it might clearly improve that decision for them. And if they see, gee, I spent 10 minutes thinking about a few new alternatives, one of them's a lot better, and so this worked out a lot better, they get the benefits right away. If they get those benefits, I think there's a much greater chance that they'll be more interested in really learning more about what they can do to improve their decisions. The front end and the back end of decisions. When I started learning about decision analysis, anything you'd see written about how to learn it in that process could have begun with a sentence like this. Given a decision problem of the following description, with these objectives and these alternatives, then. And you look at the probabilities, they give you some data, so you have to build some models there. You need to get an objective function. You try to figure out the pros and cons. You do sensitivity analysis, and you get insights. And I thought, this is great. And I figured people certainly knew the front end. Somebody has a decision, they got to know what their decision is and what their objectives are and what their alternatives are. And I'm sure everybody in this room who's done consulting knows that often isn't the case. They take off and work on a part of their decision. or maybe just a means component to it. Or they don't have all the objectives at all, and it's just not a full analysis. It only does one that's easy to analyze. They don't take the tough ones where, heaven forbid, judgment would be needed, and there's a lot of uncertainty about that. And so it's very far from true that people can do that front end. And the key thing is, how can you do a good analysis of a decision if you don't have a clear front end of that decision? You're analyzing something that isn't your real decision, or is a part of it, or only half of it because you don't have all the objectives, or the alternatives. So it's key to deal with those three. Those are the three essential elements, I think, for any decision. I'll comment on those and then two others. Your decision statement should be one sentence and very clear. A great way to judge it is, does anyone else who reads it, understand what your decision is? Now, if you say, boy, I got problems with my job and I got to make some decisions, I don't think anybody would know what your real decision is there. What's causing those problems? What are the effects on you? What can you do to possibly have an impact on that set of things? It's not clear, so you want a clear statement that begins, like, decide where to go for an upcoming one-week vacation. That's pretty clear. But it's worthwhile sometimes thinking of alternative statements, like the one there. Decide what to do for an upcoming week that's free. Vacations is only one of the options. You could take a special course and learn how to make better decisions. Skip your vacation and have the rest of your life much better. Anyway, you want to work on the right decision. Now, what's an example of this for a nudge? A friend of mine, actually in this vicinity, talked to me about a friend of hers who I've never heard of, don't even know her name, in England. And she said this friend just found out that her husband had had an affair for the following 2 years and wanted to get even with him. And she said, what do you think I should do? And I didn't think that sounded like the right decision, but I said, well, do they have any children? Yes, 7 and 11, 2 children. I said, it seems to me at least a much better decision would be decide what to do that is in the best interest of your children and yourself for their lives. That was translated to her, communicated to her, and what I heard is it just totally changed the way she thought about it. You don't get even or teach a lesson. Those are terrible definitions of decisions. Delve into it. What do you want to achieve by any of that or hope to get out of it? Just that change of the statement was a nudge that would certainly lead to, hopefully, better choices. And it could include bringing her husband back in much more to the family, or maybe pushing him out, however the situation was. I know nothing about the details there. But that's where getting your decision right really matters. Now, and here's some examples of poor decision statements. Decide to purchase a cheap TV. That even starts with decide. Likely, something else would be important there on a TV. It costs enough, and if for $20 more you could get a lot of other benefits, like it fits much better where you want it to fit, or it's much bigger, it's worth it. That's a poor categorization with just like that. Or decide what to do because the job isn't interesting. Again, that relates to the comment I made earlier. There's so many things that could be there. You want to be more specific about it. And decide if you should visit Canada for a summer vacation. Any statement where you give one alternative versus anything else that you could possibly do is a pretty poor statement, because it's hard to think about that. Whether Canada is a great alternative depends on what the best of the other alternatives are. If it's worse than Canada, Canada's a good thing, but it's a poor frame for the decision to state it something or not, usually. Decide whether or not to visit your grandmother this weekend, if you really want to see your grandmother sometime. If you do that sequentially for a lot of weekends, you might never make it. There's always something that's going on that weekend. You just wouldn't go. If you change your decision, decide when in the next 2 months to visit my grandmother, all alternatives include the key thing you're interested in, visiting your grandmother. You won't miss that. It will just occur at the best time. And decide whether to exercise a day. A lot of decisions are made at the wrong level. You don't want to do that. It's just like you don't want to decide, shall I brush my teeth tonight, each night. Set a policy and pretty much follow it. If there's a real good reason to break it for one day or one time when you were going to exercise, fine. There was a good reason to break it. But have the policy. You don't need to make the decision all the time. Second, identifying values and stating objectives. That's a key thing. What do you hope to make it? Why do you care about making a decision? You want to achieve something. And so values are what you care about in a decision, and objectives are a way to state that value once you've listed it in an achievement orientation with a verb and a noun, like maximize profits, for instance. And are people good at doing this? I've done plenty of studies. It's tough. Since this is a university, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, I've asked all kinds of doctoral students, what are the objectives of your dissertation? Early, when they're thinking of their topics that they're going to write it on. The number of people who have one objective, get a PhD, is remarkable. Because first of all, any dissertation that's accepted gets the PhD, so it doesn't differentiate anything. And I asked some of these people, do you want to learn anything in the 2 years you're writing this? Would you like to be able to write an article on it, have some fun, meet some interesting people as a result, get a better job? And many times they think, yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. But it never came up on several questions. And you wonder, how can that possibly happen? And these are, relatively educated people. They're getting a PhD. And if you don't know what you want to achieve, it's going to be pretty unlikely, other than just through luck, that you do achieve it. Now, one little example there is, suppose somebody who you'd heard about was coming to town next week. And through some ways, it was arranged that you could have a dinner, just you and them, on next Wednesday night. You were excited. You checked where their hotel was and wanted a restaurant near their hotel, great food, local cuisine. You talked to the people in the hotel, what's around here? And they said, oh, there's a great restaurant 2 blocks away, and you hear about it. You sign up. The time comes, you meet the person, you go to the restaurant, you have dinner. It's a fantastic dinner, but a disastrous evening. It was way too loud. You didn't really get to have a conversation. You didn't really learn anything about the person from the person much, and they don't know who you are. Had you just thought a little more carefully about your objectives and thought, well, I want to have a quality discussion and really get to know the person, you never would have gone to that restaurant. Or had you even just said, I'd like a restaurant to be relatively quiet, you never would have gone there. Either one of those, one objective would have avoided a disastrous decision. What's a process to identify your values and objectives? I break those into what you care about and what you want to achieve, because people are more willing to write down what they care about, because that's any way they want to state it and place it out there. Once you've got it written down somewhere, then you can pursue, well, what do you want to achieve regarding that? Found out a long time ago doing consulting, if you ask for objectives, people will say, well, is that an objective? I can't even measure that, so that's not an objective. Some pretty important objectives, you don't know how to measure right then. But if they're important, they're important. So you start with the values. And then there's a lot of ideas to stimulate more thinking about it, because you want to get it broader. And then you can ask for ideas from others. You don't want to do that first, otherwise you can anchor on what they're saying. And then you can use whatever you identified in values to probe for more. And then, of course, it's easy to convert them to a verb and a noun, verb and an object. Here's many of the ways to stimulate the thinking. From what feelings do you have about what you care about? You may have a couple alternatives that jumped into mind because you think they're great on something. Well, whatever they're great on, one. Or an alternative you're sure you don't want that people are kind of promoting. What's it bad on? Well, that indicates what an objective is too. And all these are going to help you identify various objectives. Step 3, ask others for suggestions. And that's self-clearing. And then use the values that are there. And you just push, what do you mean by that value? Why do you care about that value? And you can get means, ends, relationships, and detailed relationships, or the bigger picture. I mean the one at the bottom there, somebody on a business decision way, well, I'm interested in product quality. Oh, why do you care about that? Well, it could lead to more sales. Why do you care about that? Well, we have more income. And why do you care about that? Well, maximize profit. So there's 4 different objectives. They're all related. You got the means, ends relationship in that. You want to use one of those, but not all of them, to evaluate an alternative. You'd be double counting, unless there's other ways that can impact those you want to think about. The third element, creating alternatives. Those are the potential choices you have, obviously. Everybody knows that. 2 important facts about alternatives. You can never choose an alternative you didn't think of. And the alternative you could choose can be no better than the best of the ones you have thought of. So it's a great nudge if you can create one more alternative. And how good are people at doing that? Again, they, and I say people, I mean, sometimes I'm pretty short on this. I miss alternatives or objectives that should have been obvious to me and make a big difference. So it's not just them. What's an example? That same big dinner example. Even if you didn't think of another objective that was to have a quiet restaurant, suppose you just ask the hotel, well, I'd like to have 4 alternatives and go take a look at them for a couple minutes. So some evening before that Wednesday, you walk around and you walk in those restaurants. You would have noticed, no, not this one, it's way too noisy. You would have ended up in a better place. Same example. What are the pitfalls? Often people don't spend any time creating alternatives, or they grab the first one that they can think of. And why? Typically, we're solving decision problems. Who likes problems? Nobody likes problems. So, gosh, if I can solve this and get rid of it, it's great. So it's kind of the quick way out. And if your first alternative, well, that's probably good enough, that'll work, then it probably is good enough. And if that's your standard for life, that's not good enough. You really can do a lot better. And there's some other things down there that indicate what the problems are. I mean, incomplete constraints. People could say, well, here's some constraints. Like, you're buying a house. You're certainly not going to buy it for more than whatever, let's say $700,000, something that would be cheap in the area around here. You know, if you found a fabulous place for $730,000, maybe it would be worthwhile. It would have way more value. Let's say it just was terrific. One should think about that. The constraint would rule it out if you really used it strongly. You don't want to focus only on alternatives for others. If somebody comes up and says, well, you got a decision, you got to do A or B, often C, D, or E would deal with any of their concerns or why they're telling you this and be a lot better than A or B. Don't accept what's handed to you without thinking. So some practical guidance for creating alternatives. The reason you care about them is to achieve objectives. So the basis is use your objectives and ask one objective at a time, what might be a good alternative for that? Now, those alternatives will probably be bad on some other objectives if there are some there. Then look at pairs. What are some good alternatives at pairs? And then you look at how can I improve some of the best on each of those lists by putting in things from other parts of that list. It's kind of combining them in clever ways to get the best out of it. And then eventually, again, get feedback from outside people on some important problems. Your colleagues and friends, that can often help. Now, the last 2 elements are a little bit different. Most decisions we deal with, and the word we often hear is decision problems. And there's another concept. Well, I should ask, where do decision problems come from? Typically, they come from the results the decisions of others are happenstance. Your car breaks down, you lose your job, you get sick, you have a decision problem. Your child's not doing well in school, you can't find the faculty club when you come down here. Problems. Well, you can solve those, and they're decisions, of course. But what you can do is create your own decisions. Those I call decision opportunities. Examples are there. Decide you're going to exercise more, eat more responsibly, or improve your decision making. And I know I can improve my decision making skills, and I think most people can. And those who really think about decisions, like everybody in this room, has times probably in the last year when they realize, boy, I learned something. I don't know, I didn't know that before, but that's a good thing to know. So any of those decisions you come up with that are opportunities nudge you to some very good things. Because what happens? If you have a decision problem there on the left, your quality of life is where it's marked on the picture there, and a decision problem occurs, like you get sick. Your quality of life just dropped a little bit. You figure out how to solve it, and depending, somehow it hopefully creeps back to where it was, at least. It might go a little above it, might not go a little above it. If you lose your job, you might never get a job as good as that. But you'd be in the pink area there. But you don't improve your life with decision problems and solving them much. Decision opportunities, you start at the same level on the quality of life there and decide, well, here's a decision opportunity. Your life didn't degrade when you decided that. And if that's something you care about and you figure out a way to improve things, choose an alternative, then your life does improve. It goes up somewhere in where that bluish green picture is. So decision opportunities are a great thing to come up with. And the last one is getting authorization for alternatives. A situation where another individual, who I call the authorized decision maker, controls the decision you'd like to have. When you're the age of the people, many of the people who are being taught by DEF, their parents have a lot of control. The teachers have a lot of control. And of course, your boss has a lot of control. And most people aren't the absolute head of an organization, et cetera. And maybe things are quite collegial, but still, other people need to give their authorization in order for you to do that. And an example might be, suppose you couldn't afford more for a house than the $700,000. But you found out, or that the people selling it didn't live here anymore and lived quite a distance away. They'd need to clean out a lot of things there. That wouldn't be easy. And you could say, and they might find it tough to do in the next month when the thing would close. You could say, the deal, you can clean it out at your convenience, or just take what you want, and we'll clean it out afterwards. And you have whatever time you need, up to 3 months. Maybe you knew they were for sure going to do it by then, and you didn't need the house for 3 months. Just that offer, you might get it for the $700,000 because you just made their life a lot easier. They don't need to worry from that point on. And they maybe didn't even particularly care about the money. They just wanted to have it, quote, be a fair deal. That often works. If somebody's leaving to another country after 3 months, and there's in a 3-month period, they've lived here for 6 years, and then they're going to be gone. Well, if they have to move out and find a new place to stay for 3 months before they leave, that's a lot of hassle. You can take care of that by just your alternative. And then I'd like to mention one other thing about this that's maybe particularly applicable as a story to the people who are being taught this by DEF. Janet and my son, Greg, when he was 10 years old, well, first of all, he got pounded a lot on making decisions, of course. But he came home from school one day, he was 10, and he said, there's a special program on television tonight at 8 o'clock for an hour. Could I watch it? And I said, who controls whether you can watch it? He says, well, you do. I said, you're right. Do you have any homework to do? He said, yes. I said, if you did the homework as well as you could do it and completely, how long would it take you? He said, about an hour. I said, what if you didn't ask me the question? Could you watch that program tonight, but rather ask me the following question? You said, I have an hour's worth of homework to do. It'll take me an hour to do it very well. And if I do that and finish it, will you let me watch this 8 to 9 television program tonight? What would I say? He said, you'd say I could watch it. I said, you're right. So who would control whether you can watch that program? And he had a puzzled look for about 2 seconds, and then a smile started coming, and it got bigger and bigger. And he said, I'm going to go do my homework right now as well as I can. And what a great deal. He had the power, and that's what you can offer to a 10-year-old kid on many things, and the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old and anyone else. If they can create an alternative that meets your needs, they get it. And typically with a child, the needs are actually good for them. I mean, I wanted him to do the homework and do it well all the time. So here was an example. And he found, gee, that even works. That's pretty good. I maybe ought to do this more often. So it's a great idea. He still does it. He's in his 30s now. If he gets a great idea that he maybe wishes to pursue and needs some help or coordination from us, he'll think of how can it be great for us. Couldn't be better than that. He's thought of some really good things to do. So that's creating an offer that can't be refused, the story that I just told you about with Greg. And that empowerment is really crucial because that's what decisions do for you. And if people really get that, they're going to be, I think, more interested in decision making. So there's some practical ideas here on those 5 elements and other things and how to practice them and everything in my book, Give Yourself a Nudge. And writing that, it was what is practical that people could do, most people who wanted to could do, and improve their decisions without spending too much time or changing the natural things to them in their decision. All those elements aren't so unnatural. The last 2, maybe creating decision opportunities, maybe aren't common, but once you've created it, it's just a decision. And all people have dealt with a lot of decisions, and they've thought about alternatives and objectives and exactly what is my decision. This just helps them do what they already do, which is a plus. You don't want to start out, and I don't think anybody's ever done this, saying, you're making your decisions completely wrong. Here's a totally different way. That won't go as well as other things. So obviously this is available in various places, and it's certainly useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph. Very much appreciate that. And I appreciate that story about the 10-year-old. I currently have a 10-year-old, and all of my children have gotten decision skills practiced on them. And I think they're the benefiters of that whole thing. So
That's great.
In fact, those are what I would call better decision success stories, because they're better decisions and success stories. And I heard a little bit about policies. So I am now actively participating in the policy because I do, in fact, have drink with me. And it's okay if you're seated and you have something. And I think that we've got enough distance that I'm not putting you at risk. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. There is a program, and I'll make sure that people get it if anybody felt like they needed to have an agenda. But we're going to have lots of great things coming. And one of the next things is actually foreshadowing an event that's not in the program, because I have students lined up for you, because I know that you all want to feel that this is something that's connected to actual students. So this is a video that we use in order to introduce the decision chain. And if you don't know about the decision chain, then this is a way of grounding you in that. And then you will have the opportunity to meet the student later that is in this coming video. So
decision education, that is absolutely invaluable. It's something we do on a day-to-day basis. Having this decision chain, having this framework for thinking about the decisions I'm making, absolutely gives you clarity. It's invaluable. You see this? Clarity. That's what decision education gives you. It gives you clarity on all these different things, on how do you assess your situation. The most important thing are the values. What's going to matter to you most long term? You have to look realistically at what options you have to get towards that long-term vision that you have for yourself, and you need to know how to go grab that information from, whether it's your environment, online education, figuring out yourself, or just your peers, whatever it is that you need to do. You got to figure out, okay, what's going to give me a strong basis for making this decision, the reasoning behind why I'm going to make that decision. And at the end of the day, you have to go full pot committed on it, or else you'll never figure out if the decision was worth it. So clarity, that's what decision education gives you.
So, Ben Kitoko is here, and Ben's going to have an opportunity to talk later today. And Ben is an entrepreneur that is working on a startup in Los Angeles, and so it's exciting that he was able to come up and join us. And Ben was at a course that we did here at Stanford several years in a row, and there were students that would come and be on campus for 3, or I think Ben was on campus for 4 weeks. And we had the opportunity to really go all the way through to Steve Tawney level decision analysis, where we were doing negotiation level decision trees. So with those students that were very motivated, we were able to really take it as far as I know some people would like to see this taken. And we know that they can enjoy that and take it away with them. So that is proof positive that we can do that. We can't always get that far. The next speaker that we have is Zach Reed. Now this is a picture of Zach when he was a senior, because he did a video testimonial after we did the course at A3, which is a charter school up in Springfield, Oregon, where we did quite a bit of work. And I warned him that I was going to do this, that I would have this, this picture of him as a senior. And he thought that that would be just fine, so I have permission to have done this. And Ben, again, was one of these standout students that we have stayed in touch throughout the years. And it's really my pleasure to introduce Zach Reed.
Hey guys, it's great to be here with you today, and it's great to be doing this event with DEF and to be back here and everything. So my story with making good decisions began quite a long time ago when I was a very young boy. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, probably around the age of 5 or 6. And so during that time, my parents had to help my therapist coach me on cognitive distortions, negative thoughts, and thinking clearly about the world and trying to understand the things that I wanted and how to think clearly about something before I acted upon it, rather than acting and then reacting to the potential consequences of that. I didn't really encounter the concept of decision quality until my junior year of high school, when I was about 17, when I met Chris for the first time and encountered DEF, and it immediately stuck out to me that this was something very similar in vein to what I had already been experiencing when it came to therapy and learning how to be a better person and to fit into the world in a more cohesive manner. And so I did very well in the class. I took to it quickly, And then summer came along, and some things happened upon that. My father passed away from cancer at the age of 44, and I was barely 18 at that time. And when I re-encountered Chris my senior year, I was honest with him about what had happened and how interested I was in this stuff. And he reciprocated in a big way and invited me down here to Stanford to help TA for some of the classes that we did at Stanford that summer, one of the classes of which Ben, who you saw earlier, was in, and that was how we first met. And that was a huge deal for me, especially at that age and time. After going through all that, I really needed the break. There was a lot of friction going on, understandably, and it was good to get away and to be able to restore myself, which this absolutely did, from learning more about the decision quality and the chain and how to apply that to my life. And I eventually returned to Oregon to attempt to pick up the pieces and try to be there for my mother and my little sister. So I ended up going to University of Oregon and ended up graduating from there last year during lockdowns. But during that time, I did have a decision that I had to make. And I didn't realize at the time, but like all those things that had unconsciously assimilated into how I think, the same thing had happened with the elements of decision quality and the chain. And so I realized that I had been interested in medicine ever since I was a little kid, but I realized that after losing my dad and after undergoing all these things, that I didn't have it in me for another 5 to 10 years of schooling. And so I began asking myself, well, do I even still want to do medicine? Do I even still want to do this? Do I want to try and find something else? And the answer to that was still yes, I want to do medicine. And that helped guide me. And so I started looking at the different alternatives and exploring and shadowing different professions in medical care. Unfortunately, at that time, I had just undergone a knee surgery and torn a shoulder, so I spent a lot of time in physical therapy and ended up eventually shadowing with the same physical therapist because he was impressed by my passion for the subject. And I continued gathering useful information, how many years of schooling, what is the average GPA to get in, what testing is involved, how often do you have to go to take specialized tests and everything, even in grad school. And eventually I settled upon the physician assistant schooling, and it ticked off all the boxes for me based on that. And it was then that it dawned on me, and I spoke to Chris about it, it was that I began to realize that this decision chain, just like all those things earlier in therapy, had become unconsciously assimilated and had become a cohesive part of my thinking without me even being able to realize it until after I had the time to be introspective. And I realized that I am a very atypical case. There's a lot of things that happen here that usually don't happen to people around my age and everything. We usually have a lot more time with our parents. We don't have to grow up quite so fast. But the opportunities I had to come here, to restore myself, to get away, and the things that I took back with me to U of O, to go on to college, to go on to work in healthcare currently, they've played a big role in my life. And I would ask all of you today to consider if you know anyone who might benefit from something like that. Because I know it made a world of difference for me, and hopefully it might make a world of difference for them. Thank you.
There are so many other students that have had great experiences like that. And it's really neat to be able to have the kind of relationship that Zach could be here and would be ready to get up and talk to you all about his experience. He was saying that that was an atypical experience. I'm about to show a video that is another atypical experience. And you'll have the opportunity to hear from the teacher that was a part of this atypical experience. Better decisions, success stories. If we can make a difference in one life, that's a big deal. If we can make a big difference in a teacher's life, they spread that to other students, and it multiplies the effect. So, Carrie Brumbach.
Hi, I'm Carrie Brumbach. I'm a teacher in Central Oregon, in Redmond, Oregon specifically. I teach 7th and 8th grade language arts, and I'm in my 13th year of teaching, and this is my husband, Aaron.
Hi, I'm also a teacher. I teach language arts and history at the high school level here in Redmond.
Just a little bit about my background. I started with Decision Education Foundation in 2015 with the Summer Bridge program, as it was called then, in Elmira, Oregon, working at Elmira High School with our incoming freshmen. I did that for 2 years in the summer and then made a transition to Central Oregon. Over the course of the last 5 years with DEF, I know personally and as an educator that decision education and decision quality is not limited to the classroom. In August of 2020, Aaron was released from the hospital after his bone marrow transplant was successful. And over the course of the next 4 months, we would learn that not only was Aaron's bone marrow transplant successful, but he is in complete remission and has absolutely no cancer and no genetic mutations anymore.
Yep, and our lives are still intact and we're together, and
Yeah.
now we have a very different lens in which we view our lives.
We can extend this out of the classroom into our homes and into our jobs and into our personal lives. And I think that's really important. This is where our decision training and, the kinds of decisions you make, when you have decision training, it's a lot, I don't want to say easier to make decisions, because cancer makes nothing easy.
And it makes some decisions for you.
And it does, yeah. Some decisions
makes
you
it
just
difficult.
can't, it takes the decisions out of your hands. But what's interesting about this is that you start looking at your situation with cancer, with Aaron's cancer being in the hospital, and you start pulling out those decisions and those aspects of the treatment that you really can take control of and make decisions about. Those who have had decision education background and those who have gotten those skills have a little bit of a leg up navigating those really hard and tough decisions that we're dealing with in this environment that we find ourselves in education and in our personal lives. We had conversations about what we value, and I think what it came down to is going through this process of what kind of decision are we making, what do we value here, what are the alternatives?
Yeah.
Because there were some options. It wasn't like we just had to choose the most aggressive treatment, but there were some options.
Yeah, I could have went with something that would have prolonged life. So, you can go through not as aggressive types of chemotherapy, and it can guarantee you, a few years, but it doesn't guarantee you a cure.
And
nothing
guarantees
you
a cure. Yeah.
But I was 35 at the time, which is still pretty young. Our kids were young. And so I want to see my kids grow up.
Through the years, I've helped kids navigate extreme peer pressure and stressful situations. I've helped kids navigate academics versus sports, using all of these decision education skills. I've helped students navigate conversations with parents, conversations with their teachers, with best friends, with other family members and relatives. In the medical world, in Aaron's situation, you have to make decisions quickly, but we also wanted to make the right decision. So I think we took 24 hours to kind of think about this and ended up going with the most aggressive plan that was, only tested in 5 different cases. And, we had a huge panel of doctors and assistants kind of talk to us about, like, this is probably going to be Aaron's best chance at a long, full, healthy life.
Yeah. Or at least as close as you can have.
As close as you can have to it, yeah.
You go through something like that.
So that was a major decision we had to make just right off the bat. Like, I'm talking within the first 3 days after Aaron's diagnosis. Decision skills and decision quality is something that is timeless. It is ageless as well. This is something that our students, our staff, our school boards, parents, anybody within the realm of, making decisions which is all of us. We can all benefit from decision education's decision quality and decision skills.
You know, now that I've had decision education training, and Aaron has kind of walked that path with me too, with decision education, seeing what that has done for, you know, just making decisions. We make decisions a lot more soundly now. We use a lot more language tailored to, like, do we have enough information? Do we know what we value? What is it exactly we're deciding? And we're not necessarily taking super big leaps of faith anymore. We're taking more calculated, reasonable steps to making choices. So that's what's really nice moving forward.
Yeah, and as we have progressed in life, we've been able to get into opportunities where we can make more sound decisions. Whereas when we first started out, we don't come from families that have, you know, particularly large amounts of money, and that meant that we had to take risks in order to get to where we needed to go. And some of those risks are not necessarily risks we would take now, but at the time we had to make a decision. And that's why I think the decision education is so important, is because you have to make decisions.
Yeah, you always are. Yeah.
You want to make the best decisions you can, because that will have a huge impact on your life as you progress.
Okay, so let's see about the first handoff virtually. Carrie is joining us from Bend, or Redmond, which is Eastern Oregon. There she is. Take it away, Carrie.
I'm assuming you had to turn me down. I'm loud by nature, so well, I'm so happy that I could join you virtually. I wish I could be there to celebrate the 20th anniversary of DEF, but my son has an 11-year birthday today, and you know, that if the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that we have maybe reorganized our values and priorities a little bit, and making memories has been really at the forefront of our decisions lately, given what we've experienced with Aaron. Really happy to hear Zach's story. I think that as Decision Education Foundation grows and expands, it's undeniable that it is going to filter into our lives in a positive way. I don't think there's anything that we could take away from our decision education and say that was a negative experience, I'm worse off. We're not going to be able to say that, because it just isn't going to be true. But anyway, I'm very happy to be here with you guys. That video is hard for me to watch because we have come so far as a family since Aaron's illness in 2020. I'm proud of where we are, and I know that DEF has had a hand in our success over the last couple of years. I would like to share a story that I experienced this summer, continuing to put DEF into my educational experiences. We have the benefit in our district and in many districts across the nation of excess funds from COVID relief, because we know and recognize that many of our students have had learning loss over the last 18 months from comprehensive distance learning, at-home challenges, and so forth. So what we've been able to do is implement programs that we normally wouldn't have been able to implement based on this nice excess pot of funds. This summer, our school district decided to implement a 6th grade program for incoming 6th graders to make them feel comfortable transitioning into middle school. And what's interesting is, so far, Decision Education Foundation has entered into the realm of high school, and not just for incoming freshmen, but for all levels, 9th through 12th, that has been successful. And when we look at 6th grade, man, what a great opportunity to bring in decision education, because this is like the first level of real independence as a student that our kids have, at least in Oregon and in our district. The transition from 5th grade, from a self-contained classroom of one teacher, to 6th grade, where they have in our school 6 different period changes. They have lockers now. They have many different teachers they have to acclimate to. And it's just a wild experience for incoming 6th graders. And they're being met with many decisions they now get to make and are privileged to make entering into this new area of their lives. So we called this Camp 6. We do have a Camp 9 program in Redmond, Oregon in our district, but Camp 6 is new. And because it is new, it also had a little bit of premature development. It wasn't completely secure in the curriculum that was created. And I happened to have a leadership role in my building, in my middle school, 6th through 8th grade, of being able to implement some things that I knew maybe worked in my past as an educator with a summer program. And I immediately thought of DEF and Strong Start, which is our camp 9th grade program. And what's awesome about the Decision Education Foundation's program is that it can be adapted and implemented at many levels. And because the tools that you have and the skills that you're learning in the program really do fit a variety of different situations. So we took a lot of the activities that DEF has built into their program around the chain, and we implemented some of those at the earliest beginning of the chain. So frame, values, and creative alternatives mostly. And what we saw in the program is some really great success with incoming 6th graders latching on and understanding that they are going to be met with decisions. And some of those decisions are going to be challenging, and some of those decisions are going to be intimidating just because it's new and they haven't had to make those decisions in school before. We all know, probably all of us from our past, that middle school is a very challenging time in our lives. And some of us maybe have blocked it out. But what we're doing now is we're giving students tools that really can benefit their lives and help build great habits for when they transition into the next level, high school, where things have a lot more at stake as they prepare for their futures. So we're seeing some success at this earlier level now, which is exciting for DEF. It's almost like this great 20th anniversary blessing to start seeing us expand more. And I think that is something that we should all be super excited about. This can be implemented at many levels. And as you saw in the video, all across our lives and in different professions, and we're seeing that be something of value. So what an exciting year to be talking about Decision Education Foundation and decision quality. And boy, are we just preparing for what's to come, because we know that there's so much greatness that's going to come in the future. So blessed to be here. So glad I could spend this time with you guys. I wish I was there in person.
Thank you, Carrie. It's really wonderful, Carrie, that you could be here with us from Oregon. Everybody on your table has a Conversations for Clarity packet, and everybody should reach out and grab those. I'm going to give you a short training on what this is and how you can use it. And then I'm going to show you a quick video that proves that it can be done by a student. So the way that this came about is that I had a counselor at a charter, well, it's an alternative school. So these are students that kind of, it's their last chance. And this counselor was often in situations where she would be talking to a student, and this was kind of the last conversation that they would have. If they didn't decide to do something differently, they would be leaving this school. And so she said, I really like the decision chain. I would like to use this in my conversations. This would be better than the government form that I need to take notes on. So we put this together as a way of helping that particular counselor, and then we used it in a training of teachers. And the teachers said, this is fantastic, because the students often come to us, and we don't even have backgrounds in counseling, and we don't know what to say. And so the counselors see this and they say, this is fantastic because it gives me a tool that's like all of the training that I've had. And if we had Amy Sterneri here, who is a counselor that's spoken on our behalf many times, she would say, the decision chain is hanging on the back of her door, and she glances up and she uses it as a guide. And the way this is used is that maybe an adult would have it in a drawer, and a student is spinning their wheels, and they say, do you have 10 minutes? We'll have a short conversation. I'll take some notes, and we can use that and see where we get. So on the outside of this is the instructions. And on the inside of it, we have an example, and we have a blank. And on our website, you can download each one of these. And if you wanted to, you could also order a lot of them. And we've developed in the last year another set of 10 videos. I'll tell you more about some of the videos that we do. We do a lot of teaching through animated videos. And the animated video that we just finished had to do with this example right here. So I'm not going to subject you to that animated video. However, I was very excited when another one of our teacher trainers, Cody, up in Eugene, Oregon, saw that this was now posted. And he was doing a summer school class at the Eugene School District. And so he took a look and he said, hey, this should work. And then afterwards, he told me that he did that with the students. And he said, I got feedback from the students right afterwards, like immediate feedback. That was useful. And so it goes through this example right here. And it kind of starts out, so a student walks into the counselor's office, and they're kind of freaked out. And they ask, the counselor says, hey, you want to have a conversation? And they say, that would be really great. Well, what is it that you want to achieve? Well, I got to pass geometry. Well, and why is that difficult? Well, because the teacher sucks. Well, that's not exactly what it says in the animation, but that's often what the students think. And then you find out afterwards that, well, if you got there on time, prepared, having done your homework, that in fact the relationship would go quite well. So as you go through this, now this, in marketing trifolds, everybody wants to open this up to the middle. However, we just gathered some useful information out here on the front. And we need that useful information, so we fold it in so that we can work on the frame and the values. So this is why this is a tool and not a marketing brochure, because you're being trained on it right now. So many of you know that frame is about what's the decision that we're making, and it's not always clear in the beginning. And also values is probably the thing that people are most easily able to identify and connect to. Although, as Ralph said, it's one of those things that maybe people haven't thought enough about, and especially the trade-offs. And so the student is thinking about, well, should I drop the class? And should I do more homework? Or, I don't want to fail. I don't want my parents to be mad at me or my girlfriend or anything like that. Okay, so we gather that information, and then, here's our design thinking. We open it up, and we've got our alternatives. What are the alternatives that you see? And what are the alternatives that you don't necessarily see? And if you look in the middle, there is a little hammer sign around a tool. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about blank? If you didn't have to worry about money, if you didn't have to worry about time, if you didn't have to worry about what your parents would say, if you didn't have to worry about what your friends would say, and in this particular case, it's if you didn't have to worry about getting to school on time. And that actually takes the conversation in a completely different direction, because this student is having a hard time getting to school on time because the car keeps breaking down. And because of that, their life is one more episode of difficult. And so they come up with the creative alternative of, well, I probably wouldn't like it very much, but I could get a ride to school with Dad. And if I was in the car with Dad, I'd probably need to have my stuff together because he's probably going to ask about it. So I would be there on time. It would create a motivational influence on me. I don't really like the idea, but is it going to get me more of what I want? Yes, absolutely. And then the final thing, of course, what's the information that you want to gather in this, including uncertainty? But then we fold back and we have the chain. And you can go ahead and identify it's the chain because it's only as strong as the weakest link. So what is your weakest link? And then, are you fit to decide? So it's very important to talk about decision fitness with young people. We know that the prefrontal cortex is still coming in and they're acting more out of their amygdala, so emotional decision making. So if we can just help them to know about the decision chain so that they can stop and think and try to remember, what were those links? That would slow them down potentially enough to go, God, I can remember 4, but what are the 5th and 6th ones? No, it's not as important that it's the chain, it's that they know to slow down and that they want to balance head and heart. And then the final thing is about commitment to follow through, and that's where you write down what you're gonna do next. So it's very possible to be decision fit, but not ready to be deciding right now. And what are the things that I need to do in order to be ready to decide? So you are going to have an opportunity to meet this student. Lexi is going to speak later this afternoon. I can share with you that at the board meeting this last week, the board has accepted my suggestion that Lexi would be the student of the year. And one of the reasons why Lexi is a perfect student of the year is because I asked her first to watch the DEF videos. And she came back and she had comments that were very helpful about, what she got, what she would like to see. And we're always doing that with students. But then she was trained in the video stuff. So I said, okay, now I want you to read the fundamentals booklet. And so she came back and she had read the fundamentals booklet. And actually, my father once did this with one of his grandchildren, and he bribed them at each stage of the whole thing. Well, we had a business relationship because she was acting as a consultant and a volunteer in all of this. So I said, okay, now Lexi, after all of that, I want you to do a Conversations for Clarity for me. And so she did that. And we were having a Zoom as she was going through it. And I was like, whoa, wait. Can I record you doing this? Because what you're doing is huge. It's really valuable. Because I designed this originally for a counselor. And then we found it was good for teachers working with students. And now we have a student who has watched our material and is using it for their own good and telling me that not only did they use it, but it was useful. And so she said, yeah, well, you can record it. And this is what happened.
So I did finding a major to study in college. And first I was kind of thinking of different decisions I could do. And I was thinking mainly my focus was college in general, but I wanted to kind of narrow it down more specifically rather than just kind of what college should I go to. So I did finding a major to study, and then that was part of what I wanted to achieve. And then just being content and satisfied with my decision. And then deciding kind of what careers this might lead to, what careers I might be interested in related to the major. And I said that it was challenging because I'm interested in a lot of different things. The frame it helped me to kind of just summarize everything I was thinking about. And so what decisions do I face? What should I major in? What does this major entail? How confident will I be in my choice? And then again, just parents, college counselor, teachers, and previous students or students currently enrolled in majors that I might like. And then deadline, I apply for schools in August, so I should probably know what I want to major in to pick certain schools by then. And what is at stake? I realize that there's kind of a lot at stake. It's a pretty big decision because it's gonna kind of determine what schools I go to, because I'm gonna pick a school that probably has a good department of what I want to major in, and also to lead to different career options. So I want to be sure that I can pick a major that gives me good accessibility to different careers once I'm done with college. The decision chain I thought was very helpful because originally when I was kind of watching the videos, it was kind of hard for me to wrap my head around all the different links kind of separately. But this helped me to see all the differences between them, and then also to identify which one was my weakest link, which I thought was creative alternatives, just because I hadn't really thought about a lot of alternatives before. And I feel like I could definitely brainstorm some more. But I liked how this made me think more about different alternatives, talking to other people, maybe talking to professors at different schools and asking them about like what their classes are like and seeing like how the workload is, because those are all decisions that would impact what major I want to do. I believe that I'm fit to decide, but maybe not quite ready because I feel like I still need to gather some more info on my own. But I feel like by using these tools and mostly just creating more alternatives, then I could be ready to decide pretty soon. And so my commitments were to gather more information about what I'm interested in. Kind of maybe I wrote down specifically like to make a list of things that interest me and then try to kind of compare that with schools that have different majors and just try to find what the options are. And then after that, to talk to people maybe who are in those career fields or who have taken or who took those majors in college. I liked picking like the commitments because I always have like a to-do list or like a checklist of things I need to do. So I feel like that kind of gave me some like kind of like some steps to do. And then also for the steps, that was pretty similar, just finding majors that interest me. And then I gave myself some dates to do that. I said like this week, and then further research careers in schools next month, and then find schools that specialize in these majors before July. And I liked giving myself kind of like time constraints because then I know that I won't put off the decision and it'll force me to kind of think about it more and then try to add to my alternatives and try to add to my values kind of as time goes along, but also knowing that I don't have all the time in the world to make the decision. It was super helpful, like to add like the example one too. And I thought that was like very helpful for like my first time because I was looking at what this one said and kind of like basing it onto my decision.
So you can imagine when I have a conversation like that, I'm like, you just validated my existence. And some of this is unexpected, but each time we take a step forward, we have a little bit more visibility into what's needed next. And then we get something like this that allows us to explain it to young people one level more. So if you can imagine, we've got this packet. Now we've got a student that's doing it. Now we've got a video that takes us through that example. Today we're filming in a way that is going to create more assets that we can use in different ways. This is now something that we can hand off to people and they can take it forward, and at least they have this level of insight into some of our tools. And if they're interested, then they'll be willing to take the next step and learn more. And when Liz Thompson saw that video from Carrie, she said, Chris, I didn't know what you were trying to do because I was thinking, how is this going to be relevant for 9th grade kids? And then she saw it and she said, oh, this is for the teachers. Well, in that case, I think you should start every training with it because it answers the question for the teachers, why should I invest in learning this? Not just, well, you're telling me to teach this to students, which is something that teachers often get. First of all, they have to be convinced that they want to teach it to the students. And when we have the opportunity to work with them, we do get that kind of commitment. But also, when they get professional development, it isn't necessarily useful professional development in their lives or in their professions. And in the meantime, we have that feedback as well. So you'll enjoy hearing from Liz about that as well. I think that I want to leave that with Lexi's nice face there for the moment, but I believe that we have Florian Methling coming next. Florian is coming to us from Germany. He took time out of a wedding that he is participating in, so that's wonderful. And Florian has an exciting, it's called EntscheidungsNavi, which means decision navigator, for those of you who don't have a German background. And Florian is going to tell us about some of the exciting work that they're doing that's getting decision quality out there in Germany. So, Florian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris, and thank you very much for having me. I hope you all can see my slides and see some of the picture from the website. Perfect. Okay. So Ralph in his keynote speech just told us how to make better decisions. But what he also told us is that good decision-making needs practice and training. And I'd like to show you how you can do that. I'd like to introduce you to the EntscheidungsNavi, a decision support tool that we are developing at RWTH Aachen University in Germany. The Navi is our instrument to help people make better decisions and reach decision quality. The Navi is being continuously developed and combines well-proven concepts from decision sciences. Value-focused thinking from Ralph Keaney, for example, or multi-attribute utility theory, scenario analysis, and many more. And all of this in a freely available online tool, the link you can see here below. And every year, we have hundreds of students at our university use the EntscheidungsNavi to work on their personal decisions. These can be personal decisions related to their curriculum, to potential internships, or just in general career planning. And in 5 steps, from the decision statement over fundamental objectives, alternatives, consequence table, and evaluation, the EntscheidungsNavi helps the students and people in general to make better decisions. So our students create, for example, for a personal decision, an objectives network, a hierarchy with the fundamental objectives on top. They assess their alternatives here on the left against the fundamental objectives. They use verbal scales or numerical scales and everything you can imagine. And they also use, for example, scenario analyses to understand, okay, what's the value contribution of the different alternatives? So they see how's the ranking of the different alternatives, how they are evaluated against the objectives. And they see, for example, what's the value contribution of my objective, financial security, as one example. And what they also can see is, if I rate, for example, financial attractiveness a bit lower, so it's not that important to me, how would that change the ranking? So if, for example, financial security is not that important to me, maybe another alternative would rank on top. Or what they could also do is they can work with influence factors, so uncertainties, and see, so for example, we had one alternative here, it was about investing in a startup and founding the startup, and we had an uncertainty around, will the startup really be successful? And if we change the probabilities here and say, okay, it's very likely that it's successful, then we see, okay, the startup will rank on top. However, it's an uncertainty, and with the probabilities that the student has provided, it's rather on the 4th ranking. So the typical feedback that we receive from our students is how much clarity they win just by reflecting about their own preferences, creating a structure of their decision with their tool. And every year, the students' feedback helps us to further improve the Navi. Our current ambition is to spread the word of decision quality and decision competence beyond our university. And next Sunday, the federal elections in Germany are coming up. And I mean, what is a better point in time to work on decision competence and help people make better decisions than when an election is coming up? So about a year ago, we decided to offer something new to help people reflect on their political opinion. And there are already some tools out there, and maybe you've also used them in the past. These are tools that ask you a couple of simple questions, like, do you want to increase taxes? Yes or no. Do you want to change current compensations for hospitals? Yes, no. And after you've answered them, the tool tells you basically how to vote. But I don't know about you, but always when I do these tools, I always tend to answer these questions with like, well, it depends. I don't know. What's the alternatives? What are the objectives? So I'm not really satisfied with the current options. So we thought, okay, let's provide something different. We are teaching value-focused thinking, for example. We're developing decision support tools. So we thought, okay, let's build something new. So we came up with the Navi Parteiencheck, so the party check, something to help people reflect on their political opinion. And we started with thinking about a set of fundamental objectives that would describe the different objectives of the parties. So a general set for all of them, but where we thought, okay, the parties would probably trade them off differently. So something of the value of the power of the wording is being lost by the translation, but I just try to give you an understanding of what we mean with that. So equal opportunities is that everyone has the same basic chances in life. So for example, with regard to healthcare or education. Second one is about justice of performance. So the harder you work, the more you get out. This is the basic idea of that. Then we have self-determination, so how much the state regulates the market, companies, people. Then we have environmental protection, which probably speaks for its own, and international responsibility. So to what extent are we willing to commit our personal resources to take on international responsibility? And this whole application is just a direct rating. And we are very much aware of the potential biases and distortions with direct ratings. However, our first experience with trying that out, even with experienced consultants and decision professionals, is very positive, because their initial reaction is, I can't trade them off, they are all important. But then the more they think about this and the more they reflect, they can come up with some weights for their objectives. So it sparks some new ideas. And for example, it could turn out like this, where we have a high weight on environmental protection and a lower weight on the others, lowest weight on equal opportunities. But for sure, we wanted to provide something more than just a tool to reflect on the personal opinion and just rate these objectives. So we started to reach out to politicians to ask politicians for their objectives weights. And indeed, we got some interviews with politicians, but you have no idea how hard it is to get a politician to commit to concrete numbers and weights for these objectives. So we had to ask our students to help us, and we asked our students to work through the different parties' election programs, identify all of their different initiatives, categorize them into the different objectives, and calculate a relative weighting of these initiatives regarding these objectives. So the evaluation that we offer in the end is a ranking of the different parties and how their objective weights fit with your assessment. So on top we have the Greens, the second one would be the Liberals, and afterwards we had Conservatives. But this is not a recommendation to vote this party. I can't highlight this enough, because things like integrity, competence, tactical or coalition considerations, they are all out of scope. However, it is food for thought. It's food for reflection. It offers a different perspective to think about the personal vote. And it's something that gets people interested in decision sciences and decision competence. And in recent time, we've also got some traction in the media. In German media, on RTL, for example, this is one of Germany's biggest TV channels, and they launched the tool on their website. You see the party check down below. And just with Google Translate, you can see, okay, CDU, SPD, or Greens. So there was an article about that. And in the end, they linked our tool with that website. And we had tens of thousands of people analyzing their political opinion. I think the last time I checked, we had 60,000 people using value-focused thinking, reflecting on their political opinion, and hopefully reach some more decision quality. And with this, I would like to encourage you to give it a try, visit the website, see it for yourself, train your decision competence. You can use the link below. And if you have some feedback, please share it with us. We're continuously trying to improve the tool to help people make better decisions. And with this, back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Florian. Exciting work. I would love to have us have something with 60,000 views on it. And we're excited to work with Florian and EntscheidungsNavi to come up with ways that we can use it in our work as well. In fact, that's already been done using our Rigs to Reefs video. And I saw that Max Henryon is here, and that film is being used in University of Texas, Austin by SDG and Eric Bickel in negotiation stuff with that kind of technical background. So it has a life, it's all of very high quality, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Belkora, who's going to talk about his work with students at UCSF.
Once upon a time, there was a young medical student who woke up on the day of her last exams of the first year of medical school. And when she woke up, her roommate was already up. The young lady's name was Alexandra, and her roommate was Stephanie. And Stephanie was up and getting ready to leave, and Stephanie was heading to work, went downstairs, her boyfriend's car. Now, when she got in her boyfriend's car, she noticed that her boyfriend was wearing shorts, and the shorts were wrinkled. And this vexed Stephanie because she felt that her boyfriend, who was heading to his first day at a new job, should be displaying better grooming. So they had a conversation that went something like this. Stephanie said to the boyfriend, let's call him Dave. She said, Dave, that's really not acceptable. And Dave said, you're the only person who really cares what I look like. No one is going to care at work. Well, Dave lost that conversation, and what happened was Stephanie marched Dave back upstairs into the apartment because she was going to iron the wrinkles out of his shorts. So they open the door, and they find Alexandra out cold on the floor. She has no pulse, she's unresponsive, and they call 911. And 911 teaches them over the phone to administer CPR. And the new protocol for CPR is you don't have to worry about the breathing, just focus on the chest compressions. And the beat, for those of us who are old enough to remember this, is to the beat of Staying Alive, the Bee Gees song, which is a pretty helpful mnemonic when you think about it. So the EMTs arrived shortly after that, and they defibrillated. They got the paddles and shocked Alexandra's heart. And then they took her to the emergency room. And the emergency room, like many emergency rooms, had a sign. And the sign said, this is a matter of life and death. Time is of the essence. Everybody slow down. And in fact, that's what they did with Alexandra. From a medical care point of view, they induced a coma and put her in hypothermia, so they wanted to cool her body to 92 degrees so that the body would preferentially orient blood flow to the vital organs, to the brain vital organs, prevent brain damage and other damage to the organs. And they left her in this coma for 3 days, and then they thawed her out. There's another expression in medicine, which is that you're not dead until you're warm and you're dead. And that's what happens often. People are pulled from freezing lakes, and they can be reanimated because of that. So happily, when they thawed Alexandra out, she was fine. I went to see her 3 days after this event, and it was like a miracle had taken place. I was having a conversation with her in the hospital, as if nothing had happened. It was a miracle. And I said to her, Alexandra, this is a miracle. And she said, yeah. She said, but I'm not out of the woods yet. She said, I am facing kind of a tough decision. And that is, am I going to have a defibrillator implanted? Or am I going to wear a jacket? Or there might be some other options, and we're trying to figure all this out. And I said, yeah, that's a tough decision. And she said, it's okay, though. And this is one of those moments we sometimes have, Chris, your life has meaning. She said, it's okay, thanks to you, I know how to make tough decisions. Back up a little bit, Alexandra was in year 2008, it goes so far back, I don't know if we can see it on the screen there. She was in this class of post-baccalaureate interns who come to UCSF on their way to medical school. They're taking a gap year or two. And so Alexandra spent 2 years in a program where I teach these interns to be health coaches. And actually in this program, this is the post-bac program, they're really decision coaches, and they focus primarily on areas like cancer care at UCSF. And if you think about it, a health coach, really any kind of coach, is the human instantiation of a nudge, because what I train the coaches to do is to help people reflect critically on their decisions. And really that critical reflection happens in 4 channels. It's really pretty simple. It's thinking, talking, reading, and writing. And I had another student recently tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night. Her name is Margot, and she said she smacked her forehead in the middle of the night because she'd been really worrying about a decision involving a living situation. And she woke up and she told herself, Margot, you've been thinking about this, and you've been talking about it, and you've been reading about it, doing research, but you haven't been writing about it. And so she got out of bed and wrote about it, and immediately came to a greater sense of clarity. So all this to say that when Alexandra said, I know how to make tough decisions, it's because she was able to self-administer, and I was able to help her as a coach write about her decisions as she was thinking, talking, and reading about these decisions. And to Ralph's point about value-focused thinking, it's an iterative process. So I've taken the decision quality dimensions and put them into an acronym called SCOPED. And that stands for Situation, Choices, Objectives, People, Evaluation, and Decisions. And what's important about this is that the acronym is actually kind of useful because it connects in the medical field to something called a SOAP note, which was a sort of paternalistic way of helping guide patients through decisions and documenting your decisions in a SOAP note. So I wanted to create the scoped note for doctors and others to document their decisions, but in a more, what's now called shared decision-making way, a less paternalistic way. So Alexandra was able to write out her decisions, each of these dimensions, make a list of her alternatives. Initially, there were just 2 alternatives, which were the implanted defibrillator and the jacket. Oh, and then a third one of neither. But when she looked at her objectives and she reflected on her situation being in her 20s and wanting to date, and the priority that she put on her cosmetic appearance, and the fact that these defibrillators were typically implanted now subcutaneously, which meant she'd kind of have a deck of cards sticking out of her chest, she felt like, well, I wonder if there's another way. And it turned out that previously these defibrillators were implanted submuscularly, and that was a little less obtrusive. And so actually what Alexandra ended up doing was having conversations with her doctors about, could we do this kind of old style submuscular, which has some trade-offs because the batteries are less accessible and the leads are less accessible. So there were trade-offs. But that turned out, long story short, that turned out to be a good alternative, and in fact the one she pursued. And I only have a few minutes today, so I will cut to the chase and tell you sort of how the story turns out. I'm very happy to say that Alexandra resumed medical school and, in fact, went on to do a residency in internal medicine at UCLA, and then came back to UCSF and did a fellowship in interventional cardiology. This is kind of the wounded healer model. Often people, when they experience something like this, are even more attracted to being a healer in that area. So Alexandra just started her first week working at Kaiser as an interventional cardiologist. And also relevant to the story is that back in July, Amy and I attended her wedding, and it was a wonderful affair. And she, in fact, married another intern from the same class back in 2008. So there's lots of good, wonderful intersections in this kind of story. Perhaps one way to bring it all together is just to say that these now represent 140 students who've gone through this particular program. We have another 128 alumni on the undergraduate version of this. And so I just want to echo everything that's been said here so far about how we can train young people to engage in decision coaching, to coach themselves and to coach others. And that a lot of the value of the coaching, in fact, is simply being a accountability and commitment partner and a thought partner for someone. We teach a neutral and non-directive style of coaching. And that in some respect, it does boil down to the simple acts of critical reflection, of being able to step out of a situation that you're thrown into and think, talk, read, and write. And so those are things, those are lessons that should be really accessible to everyone and that we can emphasize in many different ways, as we've heard today, all the different approaches that people are taking. So I just want to say, if you're interested in hearing more, you can go to my website, jeffbelkora.com. You can go to scoped.com to learn more about the scoped approach to thinking, talking, and reading and writing about your decisions. And I'm certainly going to be here for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And we are going to take our first break of the day. And so since we do have people online, I would ask that you come back at 3:30. Thank you.